Welcome to Globewise Entertainment, your backstage pass to Hollywood's golden age, forgotten legends, and the jaw-dropping secrets they never wanted you to know. Today, we're diving deep into the hidden stories, shocking twists, and fascinating behind-the-scenes moments that shaped the most iconic classic movies of all time. From on-set scandals to untold genius, you're about to see these films in a whole new light. If you love classic cinema and crave the stories beyond the screen, hit that subscribe button now and become part of the Globewise family. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, which classic movie is your all-time favorite. Let's get started, the reel is rolling. 1. Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, the tragedy behind the teenage rage. Beneath the cool swagger of James Dean's leather jacket and the teenage angst of Rebel Without a Cause, lies a story darker than the streets of 1950s Los Angeles. Director Nicholas Ray crafted the film in just a few weeks, originally intended as a black-and-white B-movie. But once James Dean was cast, everything changed. Dean brought more than just talent, he brought raw, unpredictable energy. He wasn't acting, he was living the role of Jim Stark. What audiences never saw was the haunting tension behind the camera. Ray reportedly had an affair with co-star Natalie Wood, who was just 16 at the time, while simultaneously in a rivalry with Sal Mineo over creative control and screen time. The relationships on set mirrored the film's themes: confusion, betrayal, and longing for acceptance. But the biggest secret? Dean never saw the finished film. Just weeks after production wrapped, he died in a car crash at 24. His final words? "That guy's gotta stop. He'll see us." Seconds later, his Porsche was crushed. The movie, once a small studio gamble, became a cultural landmark overnight, immortalizing not just teenage rebellion, but the ghost of a star taken too soon. The real tragedy of Rebel Without a Cause wasn't just in the script, it was written into the lives of its stars. 2. North by Northwest, 1959, secrets in the shadows of suspense. In the golden age of Hollywood, Alfred Hitchcock was a master puppeteer, pulling the strings of suspense like no one else. And in North by Northwest, he wasn't just directing a thriller, he was staging a cinematic magic trick. The story followed Cary Grant as Roger Thornhill, a suave ad executive mistaken for a spy, hurled into a deadly game of cat and mouse. But what unfolded on screen was only half the story. Behind the camera, secrets brewed. Hitchcock wanted realism, but not the studio kind. When he planned the now iconic crop duster chase, he didn't bother with permits. Instead, the crew shot in the middle of a dusty California road, dodging real planes and risking real danger. The eerie silence before the attack? Pure Hitchcock, removing the musical score to make every moment uncomfortably real. Then there was the scene atop Mount Rushmore. The government refused to let Hitchcock film on the real monument. So what did he do? He built a massive replica of the monument's face in Hollywood, carving cinematic history from plaster and shadows. Cary Grant himself was baffled by the plot. He once asked Hitchcock, "What the hell is going on?" The director simply smiled and replied, "Don't worry, your confusion helps the audience." In truth, Hitchcock kept even his stars in the dark, carefully controlling the flow of information to heighten their on-screen tension. And that famous final kiss in the train car? It wasn't just romance, it was subversion. Censors had strict rules on how long a kiss could last, so Hitchcock cleverly cut the scene into multiple takes, sneaking in a passionate, continuous embrace that pushed past the limits without breaking the code. North by Northwest wasn't just a thriller. It was a puzzle, a performance, and a playful game between filmmaker and viewer. A story of mistaken identity, and deliberately crafted deception. 3. A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, the passion, power, and censorship that changed cinema. In the sweltering heat of New Orleans, Marlon Brando burst onto the screen, bellowing "Stella!" And Hollywood was never the same again. But behind that legendary cry was a storm of controversy, passion, and raw intensity that shook the very foundations of 1950s cinema. Directed by Elia Kazan and adapted from Tennessee Williams' provocative play, A Streetcar Named Desire wasn't just a film, it was a war between art and the strict Hollywood production code. Vivien Leigh, already a star from Gone with the Wind, brought a haunting vulnerability to Blanche DuBois. But off-screen, she was battling real-life demons, mental health struggles that made her performance almost painfully authentic. Marlon Brando, meanwhile, was electric, untamed and unpredictable. He brought a new kind of masculinity to the screen, rough, emotional, and dangerously magnetic. Yet his method acting often clashed with Leigh's classical style, creating palpable tension both on and off camera. The censors forced Kazan to cut scenes they deemed too sexual or morally offensive. Even so, the film pulsed with suppressed desire and psychological heat, its power undiminished. And here's a hidden gem: Brando's sweaty, torn t-shirt didn't just turn heads, it started a national trend in men's fashion. Sales of undershirts skyrocketed overnight. Streetcar went on to win 4 Oscars, but what it truly did was shatter taboos and usher in a new era of realism in American cinema. What the audience saw was unforgettable. What happened behind the scenes? Even more intense. 4. Dr. Strangelove, 1964, Behind the Madness, a story of chaos and genius. When Stanley Kubrick set out to make Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, he didn't plan on creating a comedy. Originally adapting a serious Cold War thriller, Kubrick had a revelation mid-script: the subject matter was too absurd to take seriously. The more he explored nuclear strategy, the more it felt like dark satire, and so, one of the greatest political comedies of all time was born. Behind the scenes, the film was just as wild as what appeared on screen. Peter Sellers, originally cast to play just one role, ended up playing 3, the bumbling British officer, the clueless US president, and the maniacal ex-Nazi scientist, Dr. Strangelove himself. He was supposed to play a 4th role, the cowboy pilot Major Kong, but dropped out after spraining his ankle on set. That role went to Slim Pickens, who arrived on set thinking he was in a straight war drama. Kubrick didn't tell him otherwise, his authentic seriousness became comic gold. Much of the film's iconic moments weren't even scripted. Sellers improvised many of Strangelove's bizarre outbursts, including the uncontrollable Nazi salute and the unforgettable line, Mein Führer, I can walk. And that final scene? Where a deranged Dr. Strangelove stands up from his wheelchair just as the world ends in nuclear fire. Completely unplanned. Kubrick loved the moment so much, he kept it, and cut to the Doomsday montage, set to the ironic tune of We'll Meet Again. Dr. Strangelove wasn't just a film, it was chaos turned into cinematic genius. A dark comedy that accidentally became more truthful than satire had any right to be. 5. The African Queen, 1951, a jungle adventure on and off screen. In the heart of the Congo, under the blistering sun and surrounded by buzzing swarms of insects, 2 Hollywood legends, Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, set out to shoot a film that would become a timeless classic, The African Queen. But this wasn't your typical studio shoot. There were no fancy trailers, no gourmet catering. This was war with nature. The cast and crew quickly learned that the real villain wasn't a German gunboat, it was the jungle itself. The heat was relentless. The mosquitoes were merciless. And the water? Deadly. Nearly the entire crew came down with dysentery or malaria after drinking the local water. Everyone except Bogart and director John Huston. Their secret? They drank nothing but whiskey. While others were confined to makeshift jungle toilets, Bogart famously quipped, I built immunity with scotch. Katharine Hepburn wasn't as lucky. She became violently ill but kept going, using a bucket off camera between takes, her iron will turning the film into a personal challenge against both nature and nausea. Later, she would write a book about the ordeal, aptly titled The Making of the African Queen, or How I Went to Africa with Bogart, Bacall and Houston and almost lost my mind. Filming on the river was even worse. The rickety boat, the real leeches, the camera equipment breaking down in the humidity, it was all chaos. Yet somehow, that chaos translated into cinematic gold. The gritty realism of the film came from lived experience. What you see on screen is exactly what they endured. And when the film hit theaters, it was a triumph. Bogart won his only Academy Award, Hepburn earned a nomination, and The African Queen became not just a movie, but a legend. Because sometimes, the greatest adventure happens behind the camera. 6. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, a desert epic with dangerous secrets. When Lawrence of Arabia hit theaters in 1962, audiences were swept away by the vast deserts, thundering camel charges, and the enigmatic hero at its heart. But what they didn't see was the brutal reality behind the camera. Director David Lean was obsessed with authenticity, and that obsession nearly broke his cast and crew. Filmed in the scorching heat of the Jordanian desert, temperatures soared past 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Peter O'Toole, the blue-eyed Irishman playing T. Lawrence, wore linen robes and sat on camels for hours, often with second-degree burns on his legs from the saddle. One day, a camel threw O'Toole into a sandpit filled with hidden rocks. His concussion halted production for days. And that breathtaking scene of Lawrence crossing the shimmering desert? It was made possible by an experimental lens never used before, one that flattened the horizon and made the sand stretch to infinity. But the dangers weren't just physical. Lean and O'Toole clashed constantly, the film ran massively over budget, and studios feared it would flop. Yet, despite the chaos, something miraculous happened. The pain, heat, and tension bled into the film itself, giving it a mythic, larger-than-life quality. And when it finally premiered, Lawrence of Arabia became one of the greatest epics of all time. All born from blood, sweat, and sand. 7. Cleopatra, 1963, the epic that nearly destroyed Hollywood. Cleopatra wasn't just a movie, it was a spectacle of chaos, scandal, and excess. Originally budgeted at $2 million, the production spiraled out of control and ended up costing over $44 million, the most expensive film ever made at the time. Sets were built, torn down, and rebuilt. The crew shot for months in London before moving to Rome and starting over from scratch. But the real drama wasn't just on the screen. Behind the scenes, Elizabeth Taylor, already one of the world's biggest stars, fell in love with her co-star Richard Burton, despite both being married to other people. Their steamy affair dominated headlines worldwide and was condemned by the Vatican as erotic vagrancy. Production delays were endless. Taylor nearly died from pneumonia, halting filming for weeks. Directors were fired. The script ballooned into a 6-hour epic before being cut down. When it finally premiered, Cleopatra dazzled audiences, but nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. The studio had to sell off land to survive. Yet through the ashes of scandal and financial ruin, Elizabeth Taylor emerged more powerful than ever, and Cleopatra became a symbol of old Hollywood's ambition, vanity, and raw star power. 8. A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, when acting became too real. A Streetcar Named Desire wasn't just a film, it was an emotional earthquake that shook Hollywood to its core. Marlon Brando, in his breakout role as Stanley Kowalski, brought raw, animalistic energy to the screen. His intense method acting was groundbreaking, but it came at a cost. He stayed in character off-camera, often intimidating those around him, including co-star Vivien Leigh. Leigh, already struggling with bipolar disorder, was deeply affected by the film's dark themes. Her role as Blanche DuBois, a fragile woman descending into madness, mirrored her own unraveling mental state. Director Elia Kazan later admitted he feared the role had permanently damaged her. The tension between Brando and Leigh wasn't just acting, it was painfully real. And yet, it created some of the most electrifying performances in film history. When the camera stopped rolling, the scars remained. Lee's condition worsened in the years that followed, and Brando carried guilt about his intensity on set. A Streetcar Named Desire won 4 Oscars and redefined what acting could be, but behind the applause was a haunting truth: the price of authenticity was often far too high. 9. All About Eve, 1950, Backstage Betrayal and Real-Life Rivalries. All About Eve is Hollywood's most savage love letter to Broadway, an icy tale of ambition, betrayal, and fading fame. But what played out behind the scenes was just as deliciously dramatic. Bette Davis, known for her fiery presence and sharp tongue, stepped into the role of aging star Margot Channing after Claudette Colbert dropped out due to injury. Davis had just gone through a bitter divorce, and her raw emotion poured into the role, some say a little too naturally. On screen, Margot is manipulated by the cunning young Eve, played by Anne Baxter. Off-screen, whispers flew that the two actresses were secretly competing for screen time and director Joseph L. Mankiewicz's favor. Davis claimed to love Baxter, but tensions simmered, mirroring their on-screen power struggle. Adding more heat to the drama? Marilyn Monroe. Then a virtual unknown, Monroe appeared in a small but memorable role. Davis reportedly didn't take kindly to the young blonde bombshell stealing attention, especially when she flubbed takes and needed multiple retakes. The irony? The film about ruthless ambition and showbiz politics was itself a stage of clashing egos, jealous glances, and whispered sabotage. All About Eve wasn't just a story, it was a mirror held up to old Hollywood's own cutthroat world. 10. The Misfits, 1961, The Final Curtain Call. The Misfits wasn't just a movie, it was a haunting farewell. Written by legendary playwright Arthur Miller for his then-wife Marilyn Monroe, the film brought together a powerhouse cast: Monroe, Clark Gable, and Montgomery Clift. But instead of cinematic magic, what unfolded behind the scenes was a slow unraveling of broken stars. Monroe was battling severe depression and addiction. She often arrived late or not at all, causing production delays that frustrated the crew and devastated Miller, who watched their marriage fall apart on set. Clark Gable, determined to do his own stunts to prove he still had it, pushed himself to the limit during intense desert scenes. Just days after filming wrapped, Gable suffered a fatal heart attack. Monroe died a year later, and Clift, already struggling with inner demons, would pass just a few years after that. The Misfits became the final completed film for both Monroe and Gable. Though it was a box office disappointment at the time, the movie gained cult status for its raw performances and melancholy tone. More than just a story of aging cowboys and lost souls, The Misfits is a haunting time capsule, capturing the last flicker of 3 fading Hollywood icons before the lights went out. And that's a wrap on today's journey through the hidden secrets and behind-the-scenes magic of classic cinema. From unexpected casting choices to real-life drama that changed movie history, we hope you discovered something new and surprising. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, what are you waiting for? Join our growing community of movie lovers and Hollywood history buffs by hitting that subscribe button now. Tell us in the comments, which classic movie do you love the most? Or was there a behind-the-scenes secret that totally shocked you? Until next time, keep the reel rolling and the legends alive, only here on Globewise Entertainment.